Welcome to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at fppradio.com. So today is Wednesday, which means it's AMA, where you get to ask me anything, and I will answer your questions. And if you listened to the first AMA last week, you know that sometimes the answer is, I don't really know, but I will do my best. So I've got a couple of very interesting questions this week. The first question is, what is the plural of oasis? And, well, you might be shocked to find out that the plural of oasis is oasis, but it's spelled differently. Instead of O-A-S-I-S, it is O-A-S-E-S. But as far as I can tell, it is pronounced the same way, so the plural of oasis is oasis. The next question on the AMA is one that I have asked other people, but I don't think anyone has ever asked me. The question is, what are some of the coolest, weirdest, and most interesting things you've ever purchased with Bitcoin? Well, let me start by saying the coolest thing that I have ever sold with Bitcoin, or at least the most interesting thing that I have ever sold with Bitcoin. I sold a car for Bitcoin one time, and as far as I am aware, it was the first person-to-person Bitcoin car transaction anywhere in the world, and it happened in New Hampshire. And the guy that bought the car was actually a new mover, and that was the second thing that he ever purchased with Bitcoin. The first thing he purchased with Bitcoin was some silver that he bought earlier in the day from a corner store in Keene, New Hampshire. So I have the honor of, I guess the honor of introducing this guy to Bitcoin economics, as far as being able to use Bitcoin for buying and selling things, because he wasn't going to be in Keene unless he was buying the car from me. So therefore, he would not have been able to purchase the silver if he wasn't going to purchase the car. So things that I have bought and sold with Bitcoin, or rather that I have bought with Bitcoin, most of the equipment that I am using right now to record this show, I purchased with Bitcoin. Some of it I purchased through Overstock, where they take Bitcoin directly. Some of it I purchased from Amazon, and while you can't buy directly from Amazon with Bitcoin, you can go through the website Gift, G-Y-F-T, and purchase a gift card for Amazon from Gift, and then you can buy things from Amazon with Gift. I have purchased some domain hosting from Namecheap. I've purchased website domain URLs from Namecheap. Some of the other things, my cell phone. I bought my cell phone with Bitcoin, and again, that was one of the things that I purchased from Amazon using the gift card from Gift, GYFT.com. Let's see, some of the more interesting things. I have bought silver. I bought ice cream at PorkFest. I actually bought a good bit of my food at this past PorkFest using Bitcoin. Some of the other food that I purchased, I used silver for. I think I really only used cash just a couple of times at PorkFest. And that's one of the great things about PorkFest, is that you can go the entire week and not have to use those dirty, crinkly dollars that, have probably been places that you don't really want to know about. and probably have substances on them that you probably, well, I don't know, maybe you do want. There was an episode of Mansers. I don't even know if that show's on the air anymore, so I might be dating myself here. But there was an episode of Mansers where they were talking about the amount of cocaine that's on dollar bills. Because there's the myth that 80% of dollars have cocaine on them. And they've run tests, and yeah, there's trace amounts. That doesn't necessarily mean that, 80% of the dollars have been used by someone who was snorting cocaine. It could just be that, that dollar touched a dollar, that touched a dollar, that touched a dollar that was used to snort cocaine. And then they did the calculations of, based on the trace amounts that are on these dollar bills, how many dollar bills you would have to have in order to wind up getting a hit of cocaine. And it was some astronomical number, like 80,000, I think. Somebody please fact check me. Let me know if I'm right on that. Hell, I might even fact check myself and post something as a follow-up later. Because, of course, the show is recorded live. It goes out immediately after it's, processed. So I don't, take time after I record to fact check myself. But on this, I might wind up making a note of, fact check this, let people know later. So I really don't recall how I got off on the tangent about cocaine on dollar bills. Oh, yes, because of PorkFest. And at PorkFest, I didn't really use those crinkly dollars. Other things that I have bought with Bitcoin, and this technically, I guess you could say, was bought with Bitcoin, although indirectly in the same sense of things that I purchased from Amazon, where I buy the gift card and then use the gift card to purchase something. The Nautilus. And if you've listened to the show in the past, you've probably heard me talk about the Nautilus. And if you've not listened to the show, I'll explain what the Nautilus is. There is a vehicle that technically I don't own. It is registered to an entity that is not Darryl Perry. And, I obviously have control over the entity and to the Nautilus. But the Nautilus, it looks like a bus from the outside. And it used to be a bus at one time. But when I purchased it, it was legally not a bus. And what I mean by legally not a bus, I did not know this, but bus is a legal term that means vehicle with the capacity for 16 or more passengers plus a driver. Well, the Nautilus does not have the capacity for 16 or more passengers plus the driver. At the time that it was obtained, it only had the seating capacity for 14 passengers plus a driver. And now it has seating capacity for maybe 2 people plus the driver, so therefore not a bus. It is also being converted into an RV. So what I did was I sold some Bitcoin and then used the Bitcoin to purchase the Nautilus from a YMCA. There's more AMA when we come back on Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Online at fppradio.com. For over 35 years, Roberts & Roberts has been a trusted source for buying and selling your investment-grade precious metals. They now take Bitcoin for purchasing precious metals so you can turn your profits into a long-term investment. Call Roberts & Roberts today for knowledgeable advice on investing. 800-874-9760. Coinbase is a simple and secure online Bitcoin wallet for sending, receiving, and storing Bitcoin. Coinbase also allows you to buy and sell Bitcoin using a bank account or use their tools to accept Bitcoin as a merchant. Opening a wallet is quick and easy, and for merchants, there are no transaction fees on the first $1 million worth of transactions. I trust Coinbase. You should too. Get started at coinbase.fppradio.com. That's coinbase.fppradio.com. You can support FPP Radio by shopping online. Whether you're looking for t-shirts, precious metals, bitcoins, or books, you'll find that and more at shop.fppradio.com. Every purchase you make from one of my affiliates at shop.fppradio.com helps fund FPP Radio. That's shop.fppradio.com.
Join Darryl W. Perry on Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, fppradio.com.
Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at fppradio.com. And let me tell you a place where you can use your Bitcoin, because, you know, the question asked was, what are some of the coolest things I've ever bought with Bitcoin? Well, let me tell you something that you can buy with Bitcoin. You can buy gold and or silver with Bitcoin from Roberts & Roberts Brokerage. For over 35 years, Roberts & Roberts Brokerage has been a trusted source for buying and selling your investment-grade precious metals. So now you can turn your Bitcoin profits, because I'm fairly certain you have some, especially if you bought them when they were like $30 and you didn't do stupid things like, you know, sell all of them to buy an autobus. So I'm fairly certain you have some Bitcoin profits. You can turn those profits into a long-term, stable investment. Call Roberts & Roberts Brokerage today for knowledgeable advice on investing. 800-874-9760. That's 800-874-9760. So the next question from the AMA, what happens when a member of the U.S. Congress or House of Representatives resigns or dies? Now, I'm guessing what they mean by U.S. Congress or House of Representatives is what happens when either a senator or a representative die, because Congress is made up of two houses, the House of Representatives and the Senate. And this is actually a very interesting question, and there's not a straightforward answer for all of the question. There is a straightforward answer for what happens when a member of the U.S. House of Representatives resigns or dies. But it gets more complicated when a senator either resigns or dies. So to answer the first part, what happens when a member of the U.S. House resigns or dies, we really only need to look at the U.S. Constitution. Not that I necessarily believe it's a great document, but it is the document that spells out the rules by which the U.S. federal government is to wind up abiding. And Article 1, Section 2 says, when vacancies happen in the representation from any state, the executive authority thereof shall issue writs of election to fill such vacancies. So, quite simply, when a member of the U.S. House resigns or dies, then the executive authority of the state, meaning the governor, shall wind up calling for a special election. Although there is no federal definition of when that election has to happen. So what could happen, for instance, in some states they have rules of election has to be within 60 to 180 days after the vacancy occurs. Or it could be something to where they just wait until the next regularly scheduled election, which could wind up being, later in the year, could be a year later. So there must be a special election, but there's no time frame of when the special election must happen. Now, it gets more complicated with senators. And the reason that it gets more complicated with senators is you may recall that before the passage of the 17th Amendment, the senators were selected by the states. So, for instance, New Hampshire might have had a process by where the legislature appointed the senators. Or some other state may have had a process where the governor appointed the senator and then the legislature approved. So it was completely left up to the states. The 17th Amendment changed that to say that all senators would wind up being elected from the state that they were to represent. So there's actually a clause in the U.S. Constitution now that mentions about vacancies, and let me find that. If vacancies happen by, this is Article 1, Section 3 now, in a part that was amended by the 17th Amendment. It says, if vacancies happen by resignation or otherwise during the recess of the legislature of any state, the executive thereof may make temporary appointments until the next meeting of the legislature, which shall then fill such vacancies. So that seems a little confusing. And it sounds as though the governor gets to appoint someone, but that's not necessarily what happens. It says the executive, meaning the governor, may make a temporary appointment until the next meeting of the legislature, which shall then fill the vacancy. So, let's actually look at some information provided by the National Conference of State Legislatures, which is a very good resource for certain things. And they have an entire web page devoted to information on filling vacancies in the office of U.S. Senator. And I'm just going to read some from the page here. It says, unlike vacancies in the U.S. House, which must be filled according to federal law, the U.S. Constitution gives states the ability to choose how to fill vacancies in the U.S. Senate. All states do so through an election, but they vary in two ways. Whether the vacancy is filled at a regularly scheduled special election, or rather a regularly scheduled election, or at a special election, and whether the governor can make an appointment to fill the vacancy during the period before the election occurs. Presently, most states, 36 to be exact, fill a U.S. Senate vacancy at their next regularly scheduled general election. The remaining 14 require that a special election be called, and only 4 states prohibit the governor from making an interim appointment, requiring instead that the seat remain vacant until the next election, whether regular or special. In another 3 states, the governor may make an appointment to fill the vacancy temporarily, but only under very strict conditions. And then they have information where they list the 36 states that allows the governor to make an appointment to fill a vacancy, and the appointee serves until the next regularly scheduled statewide general election. If the person elected at the next regularly held election serves for the remainder of the unexpired term, or rather, the person elected would serve the remainder of the term. If the term was set to expire at the next election, the person elected serves a full 6 years. And then they have a list of how vacancies are filled, which states have special elections, and so on. This will actually be listed in the show notes so you can read it for yourself. But there's more that I want to talk about special elections, because there's something interesting in Oklahoma. Stay tuned to find out more. During the 2013 Porcupine Freedom Festival, Davy Barker presented an idea for a renegade psychological experiment. Since then, he has refined his idea and put his plan and research into writing. He explains, we aim to show the world beyond a shadow of a doubt that power corrupts absolutely and corrupt authority deserves no obedience. Authoritarian Sociopathy is available from Amazon.com and all major bookstores. Hi, I'm Darryl W. Perry, and I need your help to take Peace, Love, Liberty Radio on the road. In the spirit of Motorhome Diaries and Liberty on Tour, I intend to take the message of peace, love, and liberty on the road. I intend to leave New Hampshire at the conclusion of the New Hampshire Liberty Forum and return at the beginning of PorcFest. During the 104-day trip, I'll be visiting at least 10 cities across the country, speaking to people about the ideas of peace, love, and liberty, while continuing to produce daily liberty media. Pensacola, Florida, Austin, Texas, Sedona, Arizona, and Denver, Colorado are already on the map. If you have a college group, a local Liberty on the Rocks, or other Liberty meetup that you'd like me to visit, you can possibly add your event to my calendar. To find out more about the tour or to donate, visit tour.fppradio.com. That's tour.fppradio.com. Welcome back to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio. Online at fppradio.com. Before I get to the story out of Oklahoma, I want to make sure that I tell you about Coinbase. Coinbase is more than just an online web Bitcoin wallet. Coinbase has merchant services. They offer cold storage. They call it the Coinbase Vault, and they actually allow you to control your private key, because that's something that a lot of people have been really, adamant about, is they want to be able to control the private key. Well, Coinbase allows you to do that, and like I said, they have merchant services. And there's somewhere near 40,000 merchants that now use Coinbase to process their Bitcoin payments. I am one of the businesses that uses Coinbase. And like some businesses, I actually wind up giving you a bonus for using Bitcoin. The Bitcoin store at shop.fppradio.com, you can actually only use Bitcoin if you purchase directly from me, and in addition to saving on shipping, you get 5% off. A lot of the books that I sell have no added shipping, so in addition to paying retail price and getting it shipped to you at no additional cost, you save 5% for using Bitcoin. So please, if you want to get set up with Bitcoin, go through coinbase.fppradio.com. It's easy to set up. You can connect a bank account and buy, sell Bitcoin directly from Coinbase. They have extremely low fees. It's 1% plus a 15-cent bank charge that they can't get away from. That's something that the bank charges them for doing basically a wire transfer sort of thing. Coinbase.fppradio.com. So since there was the question about what happens when a congressman either resigns or dies, let me tell you about something that's going on in Oklahoma, to where there's a weird law that actually says that Oklahoma is supposed to have a special election because one of the candidates in the general election died between the time that candidates were allowed to withdraw from the race and the actual election. This story actually comes from Ballot Access News and says, on November 13th, the Oklahoma State Elections Board said it will not hold a special election for U.S. House in the second district, even though the Democratic nominee died before the election, and even though state law says if a ballot-listed candidate dies before an election, but after the ballots have been printed, a special election must be held. The secretary of the board said the Oklahoma state law violates federal law as applied to congressional elections. And while it is true that federal law tells states to hold elections for Congress in November of even years, the 11th Circuit Court ruled in 1993 in the case of Public Citizen v. Miller that the federal law does not prevent states from holding runoff congressional elections afterwards, and if states, or rather in states that require the winner to receive a majority. Louisiana, for example, holds runoff congressional elections, as does Georgia. So if Georgia and Louisiana are free to have a policy that means that the final election is not in November, then it logically follows that the Oklahoma law is not invalid. So what happened there was the Democratic Party nominee died just before the election. It was just a couple of days beforehand. And the law is actually going to be changed in January of next year that says that there will not be a special election in cases when this happens. So you had a Republican candidate that received 70% of the vote. Presumably that was a little higher than he would have gotten had the Democrat not been deceased, just because it's Oklahoma, and Oklahoma is a very solidly Republican state. But even if he would have gotten, say, 55 or 60% of the vote, which is very likely, again, given the fact that Oklahoma is so solidly Republican, the law that's currently on the books says that there's to be a special election. And the Oklahoma Secretary of State, instead of saying, there's no need to do this because the law gets changed in January, this guy gets sworn in January 3rd, so therefore by the time he's sworn in, the law will have already been changed, so we don't need to do it. That's not what the Secretary of State is saying. The Secretary of State is saying, oh, well, no, the law's invalid because, the federal government says that the general election has to be in November, so therefore you can't have a special election. But that's not what the federal government has said. The federal government, as I mentioned earlier by answering the question of what happens when there's a vacancy, the federal law says there's to be a special election. So it would be interesting to see what happens in Oklahoma if they do wind up having one of these situations where one of their representatives winds up resigning and they find themselves having a vacant U.S. House seat. Is the Secretary of State then going to change his tune and say, oh, well, no, federal law says that we have to have a special election. We can't just leave this vacant. Or is he going to remain consistent and say, no, we have to leave it vacant because federal law says that, the general election has to be in November and we can't have it any other time. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens there in Oklahoma. And there's just a couple more minutes left in the show, and I don't have any more questions. So let me use this time now to solicit questions for next week's AMA. You can send those questions to me via email, ama@fppradio.com, or I generally post something on Facebook and Twitter, as sort of a prompt for questions, if you will. You can, just leave a reply on one of the prompts for questions, or again, email ama@fppradio.com. And one last thing, and I don't have time to fully delve into this, but the U.S. Marshals a couple of days ago announced that they would be selling off some of Ross Ulbricht's stolen Bitcoin. Not that Ross Ulbricht stole the Bitcoin. The feds stole the Bitcoin. The U.S. Marshals seized nearly 144,000 Bitcoin that Ross Ulbricht claims belong to him. They're now auctioning some of those off, even though he has not been found guilty of any crime. And I would say the real crime is them selling what does not belong to them. Tune in again Friday. Peace, love, Liberty Radio.